Hi campers, this is Darren with My RV Works. Today we're in Paulsbo, Washington, and we're going to be working on this water heater back here. So let me take you a little closer and show you what it's doing. Okay, so what we have on the menu today is a Suburban water heater. It's a part number SW6 DE. And let me show you some of the mess up that this thing's got going on with it. Okay, when we look in here, the customer is stating that it's leaking, and we see evidence of that all through here, and even down the side of the RV there. The other thing that they're stating is that it's not very warm. So what I see, we just got here, we just took off the cover. This cover here is loose, so water is going to get back up inside of here. And what this is your thermostat for your DC side and a thermostat for the AC side behind these. So if this is leaking or weeping, it's going to get inside of this, probably rusting out those thermostats. So this is the electric heating element down here. And then we have a switch down in this bottom corner right there. So sometimes those switches go bad. So follow with us on this journey. I think what we'll do is we'll just do a service on this thing. We're going to pull out, this is the anode rod down below. We're going to pull out the anode rod, inspect that, do a back flush on the water heater. We'll be probably putting a new cover on right there and examining the DC thermostat and maybe even the AC thermostat. And we might even need to put on a new pop-off valve up top. So that's kind of what we have going on with this one. So stay with us as we continue on this little journey. Okay, so we've loosened this anode rod, and we're going to pull this anode rod out. Let me stand over to the side a little bit. And there it is. Okay, so we're pulling out the anode rod. The purpose of the anode rod is a self-sacrificing rod. And if you look there, you're starting to see that he's starting to get a little pitted. So now we see all the stuff coming out of this water heater. Kind of show you what we got going on there. You can just see all the that's actually, I think it's rust coming out of this water heater. Now, Suburban water heater is a steel tank. It's got a ceramic coating on the inside to prevent the rust. The purpose of the anode rod is to sacrifice itself so that the tank doesn't get eaten. So when I see that, it does cause a little bit of a concern. So what we're going to do now is we're going to back flush the water heater. Now the trick here is you see it gurgling. I'm going to lift this up, and sometimes it lets air in the top. That's rusted too. There we go. Okay, so that was really hard to open. So there may be some, the pop-off valve might be bad. So it looks like we might be replacing a pop-off valve, and we'll go ahead and put a new anode rod in as well on this job. Okay, so we saw a lot of stuff coming out of this water heater, so let's go ahead and back flush it. Look at all that crap coming out of there. Now this is way overdue for a good back flush. And we'll just keep doing this until it comes out clean. And again, my concern is some of this stuff might be rust. And if it's rust, we're kind of needs a new water heater. But we're going to try to repair this one and put all the parts on it. I know I can fix some of the components on it, but if the tank is rusted, there's nothing we can do in the field for that. But the good news is I went in on the inside, and there's no water leaking anywhere. So that's always a good sign. The problem with these tanks is they rust from the inside. We've got a bore scope we've put inside these things to look at the condition inside of them. And we might do that on this trip as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep back flushing this until it comes out clean. And I'll meet you on the other side after this process is done. So I pulled a piece of that off the edge, and that would be the ceramic coming out of inside the tank. So that's usually not a good sign. It's like a porcelain coating. I said ceramic. It's like a porcelain coating coming off the inside of that tank. So in other words, that's not like a calcium buildup. It snaps easily. But anyway, we're going to continue on. But we saw this, and I wanted to show you what we're getting out of this tank. A lot of this type of stuff. Okay, so we've back flushed it from here. All the rust and everything came out of it. There's all this buildup on it. I don't know that it's rust. I think what it is, now that I'm looking at it closer, I think it's that protective coating around the tank. And so we'll make sure we keep anode rods in this thing so the anode rod takes a hit. I've gone ahead and take some of these covers off. It's just simple screws. This right here is your DC thermostat. I'm going to show you a little closer here in just a second, but there's some rust on this whole assembly here from the pop-off valve dripping on it. So we'll be replacing the DC side. The AC side looks good. I don't want to touch it because it may be hot. I haven't checked that yet. That's the AC side. This is the DC side. So the way the furnace, I'm sorry, the thermostat, what is this thing? Water heater. Oh, notice it's not a hot water heater, because a hot water heater is kind of redundant. It's a cold water heater technically, so it's a water heater. It's got a tank that stores hot water, but a lot of people call these things hot water heaters, and it's a cold water heater. Anyway, enough on that. So down here on the bottom, on a Suburban, okay, down here on the bottom, you're going to have a switch. So the circuit leaves the breaker panel on the AC side. Let's talk AC now. On the AC side, it leaves the circuit breaker. Sometimes the manufacturers give you a convenience switch on the inside where you can turn your water heater on and off. But then it leaves either the circuit breaker or the switch. It comes immediately down here to this on-off rocker switch. When it leaves the on-off rocker switch, it comes straight up here to the thermostat. The bottom one is going to be, I'm going from memory here, I think the bottom one's targeted at 140 degrees and the top one is about 180 degrees. The top one you can reset. If the water heater gets too hot, it would get too hot maybe because there's no water in the tank and the air inside gets hot. They allow you to reset that, but the bottom one is a thermostat. So I'm coming up from 120, make it through my breaker, make it through my convenience switch, if they have one. Not all manufacturers give you a convenience switch. It makes it through this bottom rocker switch. Those bottom rocker switches are failing quite often, and we always have to replace those down at the bottom. Then we come up here through the thermostat. There's a soldered on wire, and then it goes through the high limit thermostat up here, and then it goes out of that down into your heating element, which is behind this plastic cover right here. Now, if you're going to be working on this heating element down below, sometimes it's easy just to remove the gas valve out of the way. But it energizes the heating element. If you want to test your heating element to find out if it's good or not, you just need to take one of the wires off, take the cover off, take one of the wires off the heating element, and use a meter that can read ohms. You're looking for around 10 ohms of resistance through the heating element. That will indicate that the heating element is good. On the DC side, there's a control module on the back of this water heater that is about the size of a deck of cards. Circuit goes in there. It passes out of that, again, thermostat, high limit thermostat, and then back into the control board, the little deck of cards looking igniter. When you want to troubleshoot that, what you're looking for, you're following the path of 12 volts on this side, and on that deck of cards looking controller, they're usually like a manila color, usually taped or screwed or stuck somewhere in this vicinity on the inside wall. You're looking for 12 volts on the red wire. If you have 12 volts on the red wire, that means that all this is good. If you do not have 12 volts on the red wire and the water heater is calling for heating, then there's a problem in this area right here. So if you have 12 volts on the red wire, then it will try to ignite this coming through this orange wire, the other end of this orange wire. These red wires go to that igniter module, and going into it, coming out of it, is this orange wire. And this is basically like a spark plug, if you will. You could think of it as that. And there's a little electrode gap. We're looking for about 1/8 of an inch gap between those two electrodes. And what they're doing is moving a milliamp current through that gap. One side is grounded. As long as this is grounded, one side of my rod is grounded. The other side is coming through this orange igniter wire, I guess you might call it. And we're shooting a milliamp current. As long as I have a milliamp current through my flame, because one side of the wire is grounded and I'm using carbon in the flame as current carrying, then the control board sees this current, and the control board basically says, okay, I have a flame, therefore leave the gas valve open. If the flame extinguishes for any reason, then it does not see the milliamp current, then it will close the gas valves. So what I've done is I've taken some covers off. We've got some rust here. We're going to be replacing that. We're done back flushing, and now I'm going to be taking off the pump-off valve. They have these fancy little, I don't know what you might call this thing, an adapter thing, that's going to go on there. Now we're going to have a little bit of problem moving this little mechanism here, so I may not be able to get this on it. And if that's the case, that's fine. A big pair of channel locks can kind of get it turned, but I can see now just clearance is going to be an issue on this. So next thing we're going to do, we're done with our back flushing. We're going to be taking the pop-off valve off. So we'll probably be replacing the pop-off valve, replacing the DC thermostat, and putting in a new anode rod. And while we're at it, we'll probably take this cover off and examine the read the ohms on the electric heating element as well. And hopefully, and we're also going to check the 1/8 of an inch gap on this as well. So we'll do a full service on this. So once we get the covers off and this off, we'll come back and show you what we found at that point. Okay, so now we've got the pop-off valve off here. And if we look inside, let's see if I can get that angle. There you go. There's a lot of corrosion in the air, which is inhibiting the valve from closing accurately. And even if we look inside of this angle here, you could just see a lot of the, going the wrong way here, corrosion buildup inside of that. So we'll be replacing this pop-off valve. Okay, so I've got the camera up into the hole. You can see that I think the integrity of the tank is fine, but it's, I wish it would focus. There we go. There we go. Stay right there. You can see that the integrity of the tank is fine, but the protective coating is peeling off. I can't really move the camera much, but that's inside. Let me see if I can get it to focus again. Okay, the left side of the pane there looks good, but the right side, it's starting to pop off, but the metal tank, the steel tank, looks intact. So yeah, I had it in that top hole with my flashlight shining down the bottom. So I wanted to show the difference between, this is an anode rod right here, and I wanted to show the difference between a new one and an old one. You can see how it's pitting, and that's what these rods do. They sacrifice themselves to save your tank. Okay, you see how the pitting. Now for our price, $10.69, looks like it's cheap insurance to just every 6 months, if you want to, just throw in a new rod. They're easy to put in. I don't know. I'll tell you the size of that. I use a 27 millimeter, I believe is what it is, but I'm sure there's a standard, but metric's easier for me to remember. And you just stick it in there and put some Teflon. You can go with a paste or a tape. I like the paste. It just helps to lubricate the threads, and it doesn't make the threads bigger. And sometimes what I'll also do is I'll re-tap the threads on the tank itself, and if they're corroded, but these look like they're going to be okay. So we'll just put some Teflon paste on here and screw this back in. So here we have new pop-off valves. You can see the difference between a brand new one and an old one. It's just all corroded and inside of here. So again, now they have different water heaters. They're going to have a 3/4 inch and a 1/2 inch. So make sure that when you're working on yours that you know what size you need before you go out and buy them. 25 to 30 bucks is something about what our price is on these things. The important thing is on the top, you want to make sure that it's the same spec. There's 150 psi and 210 degrees is your target. So 150, 210 is your numbers there, or you can see them right there. So that's what the spec is for these things. So we're going to put some Teflon paste on here and put it up in this top port first. We'll start there, and then we'll do the one on the bottom, and then we'll start replacing some of these other parts. Okay, so like I said, I like using a paste. It just seems to it's going to help me when I install it. It acts kind of as a lubricant as it's sealing it. I also like using these rubber gloves because once this stuff gets on you, it's kind of hateful. So here's something that's supposed to repel water, and you got it on your fingers. What are you supposed to get it off with, right? So we got some paste on there. And that just goes right in there. Now, it's going to give me grief because it's at a bit of an angle, and I'm fighting the top of this, so it's always kind of fun. No love for Darren when they build these things. And once you get a couple threads on, you're good, but then you have to overcome this part going up on the top. Okay, we're back from installing our pop-off valve, and down here we have a new anode rod. Now what we have, we're going to be replacing this DC thermostat here. There is a difference between the DC side and the AC side. There is a difference between physically how they fit. So you can't use an AC on a DC, partly because the top one has that reset button up on top here on the AC, top here on the DC, and it goes in thusly. So if it were to go like that, my wires are not going to work. And then the cover, you put these little grommets here. So this is like this cover, if your cover is cracked or whatever, for all of $4.09, and I think the gasket's $1.89 again. So we're talking the anode rod was 10, 11 bucks. I've seen them up to 16, $5, $6 for this. These are simple things you can do to prevent more costly damage that's happening right here. If you had a good gasket around it and a good cover, a lot of times these grommets will pop out. I think they're all of $1, these little plastic grommets. You know, we need to keep the water out of inside of this to keep the tank from rusting even on the outside. Or as you see, it's been dripping, and then all this rust is happening to these prongs right in here. So the next phase is we're going to install this here and then clean it up a little bit and then put the cover back on. Okay? Okay, so we're going to take off the burner tube. 2 screws here. On my instance, it was 5/16, and then just an I just used an adjustable wrench to loosen up this nut right here, and then this whole thing comes out. And this is where we need to verify that it's 1/8 of an inch, and that looks pretty good to me. So I'm not too concerned about that. And we'll probably take a little cleaner, little wire brush, and kind of scrub inside of the burn tube. Sometimes rust will get in there. There's also, notice there's a real small orifice right there. We got to make sure that that's clean. Sometimes you can see light through it. You shine your your flashlight through it. If not, just, oh my gosh, the tiniest of anything. You don't want to change the size of that orifice, but we do need to make sure that it's clean. While we're in here, we're going to look inside of our burn chamber, our heat exchanger area. That looks relatively okay. Again, there's a layer of rust on everything. That in itself does not concern me. I mean, this is an old RV, it's an old water heater, but I think we can resurrect it. When I took off this DC thermostat, there was some rust here as well, and we're going to clean that up and scrape that up a little bit. And then the reason I took this burner off is to gain access to this cover. Sometimes it's easier just to take 2 screws and loosen that nut to get this out of the way, and to get to your electric heating element. Okay, so we're going after this cover here. In order to gain access to this final screw, there were a couple screws needed to take off to loosen this gas valve. Now you do want to be careful. That's a copper tube, and it'll very easily bend on you. So we just needed to move it a little bit so we can get this cover off. My favorite little tool. We're just going to pry in there and kind of pop that off. Now I went in, see, that doesn't look good in there. I went in and turned the power off to this already, so I know that I'm not energized. And so let's just kind of, so there's a lot of rust right there. And but even though it looks ugly, it might still be good. But I don't know with all this rust on here what we're going to find. So let me clean this up, and I'll bring you back to when we test that thing. So as you see there, I'm not able to, those screws are so rusted I can't even get purchase on them to unscrew them. So what we'll do, or what I'll do, is I'll cut it right here, put a new connector on it. And but I'm pretty sure that that heating element, looking at it here with all that rust, that's going to create resistance. And so I think what I might do, this switch is also seized, all because of the dripping up here. So look at all the damage that's been done to this water heater just because the pop-off valve was allowed to continue to drip. So if you ever see this dripping, this is like a $26 part. It doesn't take much to replace it, but look at all that it's done. It's damaged this. That's a $30 part. This heating element, I don't know the price on it just yet, but we're going to need a new heating element. We need a new switch down here because we did not back flush our water heater annually. All this damage was done to this water heater because of a drip, and we see that so many times. So I can't stress enough to do some preventative maintenance on your water heaters. On my website, myrvworks.com, you'll find a resources tab, and on that resources tab I've created a sheet for you guys. You can print it out, costs nothing, and look for annual service sheets. I've made ones so far to date. I've made one for refrigerators, water heaters, and furnaces. And as I get time, I'll be making some more for leveling systems, plumbing, slide rooms, things like that as I get time. But I'm going to have to cut these wires and fight to get this heating element out of here because that's not healthy right there. And that goes back to the original complaint of this water heater. It just wasn't working very well. And well, we had rust here, which was resistance. We have an electrical heating element that's probably getting terrible resistance going through that connection right there. We saw this stuff, there's still a pile of it right there that was all coming out of the water heater. And so we're able to fix everything, but I hate to see this because it's going to be a big bill. And all because of a drip from not doing maintenance on your water heater. So I'm going to fight to get this thing off. Everything I've done, I've had to fight. I've had to squirt some stuff here. Everything I've done is just rusting and everything. So I'm going to fight to get this out, and we'll put a new heating element in. And then the journey is coming to a close. We've figured out all the problems, and then we'll fill it up with water and run it and make sure that everything's working. We'll dial it in. Now another thing on that is that burner tube. Let me show you that again. I looked inside of it, this guy right here, and what I see in there, it's not rust, it's soot. So there's soot inside of this. That's what's coming out of it, is a soot there. And so what that might be an indication of is the LP pressure is not to spec. If we look over here, let me look for it. On this legend, it'll tell us how much pressure they want, how much gas pressure they want. I know it's 11 inches of water column. I'm just looking to see where it says that, but it's 11 inches of water column. And so another thing we might do on this is check the gas pressure. And we can check it actually right here since we've got it off. And make sure that the gas pressure is adequate. So we might do that as well. But at least the next battle is taking off that. And I'm going to go ahead and replace that as well. As much rust that was in there. It may have damaged that as well. Or the other thing is, if the water heater was allowed to operate with no water in it, then that heating element will have curled itself up like a macaroni. And if it's done that, we'll be happy to show you that as well. Slowly coming. Oh, what are we going to find? What are we going to find? Oh. Okay, there's our heating element. And there, right there, I see the failure point. Let me make sure I can focus on that. So the heating element has failed. I'm going to move this around so it focus. Okay, there it goes. So that right there is your heating element failure, right in there. So the heating element's bad. So we'll replace that as well. What that would mean is, well, it failed flat out. But what causes this right away? I wanted to say right out of the gate there, is running a water heater with no water in it. And you can even see how it's kind of curved a little bit. So it got really hot and started to change itself around like a spaghetti noodle. So we'll replace this and put it back together again. But this would have been why the water heater did not work on electricity, because the heating element had failed. So I wanted to capture this. Again, some of that's that sediment. So this is where the electric heating element was. And there's some of that sediment that was that we were able to get out in there. Kind of built up pretty thick. So we'll clean that up, wire brush, and screw the new element in, because we don't want any leaks right there. All right, so we've got all that heating element connection all cleaned up really well. We put our new connectors on. This switch over here has also failed. Now, it's failed in the on position, the closed position, but the fact that it's not moving and it's not working, even though I'm getting electricity through it, we don't know the condition of that switch on the inside. So I think it's like a $6 part. So we've come this far. I just as soon put a new switch in there to ensure our success on everything else we've done. At the end of the day, we're going to have all these new, there it is, new part here, new part there, new part there, and I hate the whole thing to stop working because of a $6 switch. So while we got it this far, we'll go ahead and put a new switch in right down there, and go ahead and button all this up down here, and we're almost done. I wanted to show you a trick I've discovered. So here's our new switch. It's a part number, comes with its pigtail and everything. Set that right there for now. I did want to show you a trick on getting these switches out. Again, I'm going to use this little right angle tool. Love these things. And if you understand these switches, what you're aiming for is, see that little, let me bring it up closer, see that little tab right there? So I'm going to slide this behind it and kind of push that down a little bit as I'm gaining access behind this thing. So that's the trick here. And if you catch it just right, it pops right out. Now this doesn't not only work for, see, it doesn't, not only does it work for water heaters, so just like that we were able to get the switch out. It doesn't work only for water heaters, but it also works on any other switch like this, light switches and things like that. Okay, so one of these wires is always going to be hot. It's the blue one. The other one is going to be the one that goes up here. Okay, so our path starts here to the switch, through the switch, up to here. So isn't that the same as this switch here? Now, another thing I noticed, this is a Suburban part number, but these are supposed to be right angled. Okay. So we're going to basically take these off, okay, and I'm going to reuse their connectors, okay. We're not going to use these connectors, and we're just going to plug them back in. So I always like looking, because it is important that these connectors are the right angle flag connectors. There's not enough room to just plug this thing back in. A lot of times there's, depending on what year they made these things, there could be insulation, that white foam stuff, or it could be this yellow stuff here. But but you need the right angle to fit straight back because the tank's going to get in the way. So now that we've got our new switch on there, we just kind of fight to get it back in there. Okay. We've got our new switch seated, and it snaps very nicely. And I'm going to leave it off right now. I got the power off, but I still like to leave that off until I'm ready. And doesn't that look much, much better than the old one that we had in there? And we proved that the old one was bad. So this is a brand new heating element. We've got it in there. It's compressed up against its O-ring right there. So we've got that sealed, this done, and now we're going to start working on this. We got to clean that up in there so that the thermostat, I want it to touch the outside of the tank, and this rust is actually acting as a bit of a insulator. And we're going to also make sure these connectors are good. We might replace these. I don't know. I might. That one looks okay, because we don't want any resistance. All this rust and stuff is adding resistance to our circuit. So this is the next little part we're going to focus on right up here. Okay, we've cleaned that up pretty good. We've made a nice inviting surface for that thermostat to bond to, and you know, we've cleaned up the whole thing where the gas is going to seat, so that if there is any more leaking, we're going to do everything we can to prevent it from getting inside of the hole there, with a new gasket and a new cover, because the old cover was cracked. Okay, so we're going to assemble all that next. I want to show you one thing I did on this thermostat. I've put a little bit of a bend to it, and when I did it, I'm pushing on this outer edge here and the bottom edge there. I'm not pushing against the thermostats themselves, but I wanted there to be a little bit of a curve to it because the tank has a little bit of a curve to it. So I didn't want there to be an air gap. We're bonding it here in the center, and so I want to make sure that when that's seated, it's not like a seesaw. I'm exaggerating. But I want to make sure that that thermostat is actually touching the tank. So to do that, a little bit of a curve to it, okay? So I just wanted to show you that. Now that we've got all this sealed, cleaned up really well, we've got the DC thermostat in, we've cleaned up the connectors, we know the AC side's good, it looks fine, there's no rust there. This was the one that had the rust on the connectors. We've got our cover and our gasket, and when we install this right there and we put our screws through, it'll compress that gasket. It's got a little bit of a spring to it, and that's what we want. We want to make sure that this thing's as watertight as we can practically get it. Okay, we've got everything sealed up, except for this last electrical element. I've got it off right now. Got my switch, have it off. I've got my gas disconnected, but I'm filling the tank with water, and I've got this lever lifted up, and so when we get 6 gallons in this tank, it'll start flowing out of this top here, and I'll flip it down. So we're looking for leaks, and then once we have water in our tank, I'm going to turn on the electric, and I'm going to make sure that I have a voltage right here. So now we have water flowing through the top. So now we close that, it shut it off right away, no leaks. Okay, so now we're assured that we have water in our tank. And I'm going to go ahead and flip the switch on. That should have energized this. If I have 120 right there, then we are heating our water with electricity. So let me get my meter and we'll check that. So with the meter on AC and my switch in the on position, this is why I don't want to put the cover on just yet. I'm going to touch these 2 leads, and there we go. We have 113 volts. Okay, so we know that our heating element is good, that we are now heating water on electricity. So now we're working on the gas, and one of the things I wanted to show you is that little orifice, and you can see what I'm looking at, a little bitty hole right in the center there. We want to make sure that I've got my flashlight on. We want to make sure that that's not clogged in any way. So I've got a new one here and the old one, so I could easily just swap it out. But I really believe this one's fine. He's not bad. I've seen these in much worse condition than this. I've cleaned out the inside. It's just the soot that was in there, so we'll reassemble this one and not put that on, and connect it and run it on gas and see if we can get a nice pretty blue flame. Okay, good news. We flipped the switch on the inside and the water heater just fired right up. So there's our pretty blue flame. There's a great shot right there. Ooh, that's pretty. Of the electrode with its 1/8 of an inch gap. It's right there in the flame, and you can't see it, but there's a current being carried through the flame between those 2 prongs. And that is how the control board knows to keep the gas valve open. You're not going to want the gas valve to be open if there's no flame. So that's pretty cool. So we are good. I got a nice pretty blue flame, and there's a little bit of water and hissing coming out of there, but we've got, I cleaned that out with a hose, just kind of scrubbed out some of the soot. So I think this is a good job here. I think it was a long path. We did a lot of things. At the end of the path, we put on a new pop-off valve, a new cover and gasket, a new DC thermostat. We put on a new switch right here, a new electric heating element, and a new anode rod. And now another thing to make sure is this little area here where the gas valve comes out, make sure that's sealed really well, because this side here has combustion, and you don't want this side combustion to make it inside the living quarters. So that needs to be sealed right there. So we have a good gasket there. So anyway, hope this served your needs. Trying to put these things together so folks can learn how to fix their own stuff and do some preventative maintenance. And if you like these, do subscribe. We're putting out new videos constantly, and every time I go on a service call, you can tag along with me. And we've got a couple more customers to get to today. So this is going to be Darren signing off from Paulsbo, Washington. And happy campers, say My RV Works.